Good evening to all of you. So happy to see you in this podcast called Learn to Teach to Succeed. And the three words together because the more we learn and we are comfortable with learning, the more we are able to teach others to become better and at the same time promote success for everybody involved in here. So we'll do a quick sound check. It does work, so let's see what the plan is for today. Today's topic is about learning in an environment where it is not your first language. So this episode is about how people are in the education system or they are in the workplace, where the workplace could be where English is the main language or French or Spanish is the main language. On the other hand, these languages are not your first language. That means that the person has had to learn these languages, feel comfortable enough in the language so that they can learn and at the same time can teach or can lead in the work environment or in our society. So it is an important aspect because with the time, so in 2023, immigration is part of what is happening in Canada and in all over the place. I know that some countries there are more people leaving, many countries people are coming in, and that means that there's a variety of amazing people where English or French or other languages are not the first language. So let's see if I can give you tricks as a learner on how you can better learn. I will also give tricks for teachers on how to teach better. And then hopefully I'll be able to add some information so that leaders can actually become better leaders, either when the language they use at work is not their first language, or if they work with people that where the language is not as easy because it's important. Communication is such an important part. And I don't know if you feel that, but if, for example, French is my first language, when I moved in an area where English was the first language and I was working in English all day, I remember that I had to sleep 10, 11, and 12 hours a night just to just to be able to rest because the strain I had to go through during the day to be able to function in a second language was very hard. I was able to get skills. My language skills got better. Then it got easier and easier. But when you're learning a language, up until the time you feel comfortable to maneuver what is asked of you as a student or as a worker, as a teacher, it's not always easy. And I think that's why this topic is an amazing topic today. So I'm going to divide this podcast in three parts. The first part is in the with the learner, the learners as at the forefront. There you go. The second part will be for teachers at the forefront, and the other one will be about leadership. So that's how I like to divide my podcast, and that will be amazing. And by the way, if it happens, so let's see if I can introduce myself a little bit. My name is Alain Faber. I've been teaching in the high school, in middle school for 25 years. And I thought that this podcast would be a great way for me to share what I know, my experiences, and what I do. On the other hand, if it happens that people are watching this podcast on YouTube or listening to it, and you notice that you'd like to contribute, I'll be more than happy to be able to have amazing conversations, either about learning, about teaching, or about leaderships. Three topics that I love to think about and discuss about indeed. So our first topic is about the learner's way. So when you think of society, we have to look at um, different groups of people, and we have to keep in mind that different people have different perspective on where they are. So the first aspect is about the learner's perspective. All of us in society are learning. If you're in elementary school or high school, you're learning basic skills or you're getting better at in language skills, math, science, and such. Some of the artists out there getting better with their arts. Now, what happens is you're getting the basic skills so that when you graduate high school, then you can either go in the workplace, so go into trades, you may be able to go into sales and marketing. Some people go to college, others go to university. There are so many options available. But in all those aspects, until we get to high school, until we get to university, and even in the workforce, regardless of the pathway you choose, learning is always part of what we have to do. So if it happens that you are in an environment where the language that you have to use is not your first language, then it is a bit harder. So I'm going to share with you ideas that you can use as a learner to learn better. And if it happens that we have high school students in here, keep in mind that you may be able to find ideas on how to get better yourself or even your friends. So keep in mind that when we are kids, how do we learn best? We learn by playing. So a lot of the skills and ideas I will share will be about playing. So let's see. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I have 9 tips for each for what a learner can do to make it easier for themselves. The first one is to find a way to build vocabulary. So building vocabulary is very important because if you don't know the words, if you don't know the meaning of words, it's so much harder to be able to learn. For example, when I was in high school, actually, and I was learning English, I remember that we were listening to radios and there were activities about musics and songs. And what happens is I can listen to songs on the radio. I can actually sing the song. But I was listening to a song a couple of days ago from the 80s, and guess what? As I was singing the song, I was saying the words, and now I know, decades later, what the sounds mean put into words and the message of the sounds. So building vocabulary is very important so that you can see and understand the meaning of what you're learning. So that is the key part here. And how do we learn vocabulary? It could be with games, word search, Kahoots are great. There's a lot of apps to help with that. And I have to say that a lot of the vocabulary I learned was from either um, playing with, let's see, not video game. I had a stamp collections, and I understood a lot of the words from there. And the second, in Canada, all the labeling of food at the grocery store has to be done in French and English. And that's a great way for me to learn new vocabulary. And I have to say that wine bottles, for example, and other spirits have amazing use of adjectives to share how their products is amazing. So just a thought. And also slogans everywhere. So building vocabulary is important and we need to play with that. We can have a word board on the wall. That's a great way. Sometimes when I listen to the radio and I hear a new word, I pronounce the words 10 times, 20 times by myself to try to articulate that. The 2 last words I did was on the radio. The person was saying that they thanked the person to weigh in the topic. And to weigh in, it was so hard for me to pronounce. I had to practice so often. And the other one was what? It was an interview, and the person used the word derogatory comments. And derogatory, I had to practice that at least 100 times in the car over a couple of days to get the syllables going. So that's what I say. Vocabulary is key. The other part is about doing hands-on activity. Sitting on a chair to learn is great, but it's not the best. That's why when kids are playing, they talk to each other, they have ways to use their hands to show how it is. And that's why when I teach in the French immersion program, I love using labs in science to show concepts. Because labs is a great way for people to say, oh, I play, I see what I do. So they have an idea of what the actions are, and then you can build on the vocabulary. For example, if I have an electricity unit in grade 9, what I do is always, before I get into a concept, I show the equipment, I give them 10, 15 or 20 minutes for them to play with the circuits. They just turn on the light, they just have a closed circuit, takes about 20 minutes, they're all happy when they get it. So when we get into the vocabulary of the circuits, it's not just a concept, It's now naming something that they actually can do. So that is amazing. And the other one is students can actually use their first language to discuss with friends that have the same interest, or they're sitting side by side. So they're learning using their prior knowledge, and then they can build new vocabulary on what they know. So the idea here is not letting their first language aside in the learning. It's important to find ways to get all of that together. Another one is to use a lot of formative activities, formative play. What does that mean? It means that if you are doing an activity, you don't want to count everything. Not everything needs to be marked. So when you do an activity, you want to give notes, you want to comment on it, you want to give ideas to make it better, suggestions, so that students can build on what they communicate. Because keep in mind that when a person is communicating something on an evaluation, there's a few things you have to keep in mind. The first one is, do they understand the concept, yes or no? The other one is, do they understand the questions? And that means that this is a language issue. And the other one is, can they give an answer? And that's also a different aspect of language. So we have to keep that in mind. So here I use videos, I use plans that on the board, checklists. I also do hands-ons. All those things are formative. So we do 2, 3, 4 of them. And by the time we do the evaluations, then it's almost like a formality. The evaluations are not exactly the same as what they've done in class, but they're comfortable enough with the concepts. They've communicated verbally and in writing in many ways. They've read different things, they saw videos. So they have a good understanding. So the idea here is, how can they communicate that? Indeed, in the class, you need to model. So as a teacher, I need to model to the students what we are doing. So as a learner, if you are part of a team and you have your leader, the team manager talking to you, you want your leader to model what you have to do, because that's often how people learn. You look at an event, you look at how people do it, then you imitate what people are doing, and then by the time you get comfortable, then you can bring your own creativity to be able to achieve amazing things. But this is a process, so modeling is important, and not necessarily just yours as a teacher or as a leader. You also have to bring different perspective of and different models. It's important because we all learn differently. Another one, okay, the next three is about the idea that if you want students and people to learn better, they need to use all their senses to learn. So that means that they need to hear people talk about the topic, about sales, about teams, about science or others. They need to be able to speak it in all kind of ways, small activities, discussions, to give an opinion. That's important. They also need to read different texts. They also need to read graphs. They need to read infographics. So the information coming in is from different ways, so they get better. And something in all of this is to allow them to speak and find ways to communicate their learning. If you take little kids, they're not learning grammar at the age 2 or 3 or 4. The first thing they do is they learn to speak, to find the vocabulary, and they build the confidence they need to communicate. And once it's done, then you can add the more tedious aspects of grammar, writing, and so on. So when I have, for example, evaluations, I use, so they have to read often and they have to write answers. But often I don't do evaluations where they have to read something and write. Sometimes they have to do an activity, then they need to tell me about it. By telling me about it, it allows them to be able to find the vocabulary to be able to communicate their learning. And that's quite amazing. And the beauty of that, I always tell my students, if you do written activities, often I don't give as many options to redo the evaluations, because I tell them that by the time you do these evaluations, then you can build on what you've learned, my comment, and use that for the next step. So it's a growing aspect. With respect to evaluations, when it's a let's say presentation, for example, or they do it verbally, I always tell them you can do it as many times as you wish. And the reason for that is as you speak, you make connections and you make so it's so much easier because some people they will study, they say, oh, I've studied a lot of the topic, then I write the answer and I forget. But when you actually have to present a topic, you actually need to have a good idea, especially if the person listening to your presentation are asking some questions. And that's the beauty of learning. You present something because from what you've learned, you get feedback, and then you can do it again and show how much you've grown. The other two is the idea that you need to use pictures. Visual aspects are very important because when you use visuals, it allows people to say, okay, they look at something, they can use their first language, their second language, they can use their feelings, what they see, or what they've experienced in the past. That means that there are many dimensions in the learning, and that's good. And the last one is to take time. There's no rush in learning. Some people take more time, some other people take less time. And the idea here is to make sure that people have the time to figure out what is going on. I always tell students that when you learn, it's a bit like your knowledge base is a bit like a Swiss cheese. You have a block of cheese with holes in it. And what happens is you have a good idea of the topic. On the other hand, there's those parts that you don't quite understand, or there are questions that you would have liked to know the answers and you don't. Maybe you're missing or sick in one lesson or two. So what happens is you have a good idea, and that's the block of cheese, but there's those little holes. And I tell my students, as we progress, I use your prior knowledge. But when we address a topic and you notice, oh, I'm not quite sure, it's important for them to say, okay, I have a question, I'd like to have some clarification. I need to learn a new word, I need to read something about it so that we can answer that unknown, and then we can fill out that hole in that cheese. And the interesting thing is often we don't know where those holes are because either we don't know the vocabulary, and often we don't know what we don't know. And it is the same in a topic that you have to learn at school or as part of a team. It could be company politics, and it could also be in business. There's a lot of things I don't know in business. The more I read, the more it's exciting. But in business, often you don't know what you don't know, and that's why mentors are so amazing. So the second segment of this podcast, so I've talked about learners in the last 15 minutes or so. My second point is about teaching. If you're a teacher, either for little kids, bigger kids, adults, you are maybe you are teaching not necessarily in a school, could be also if you're doing training in a company. Training is such a big part of our world because there's so much we can learn at school or at university, college, and so on. But once you get to the workplace, every environment, every workplace have their own rules, own trainings, own safety to consider, and therefore training happens everywhere. So if you are training students or adults where your language of teaching is not their first or second language, then sometimes it can be tricky. So that means that you need to find ways to help them understand. And what are the ways? You'll see they're very similar to the examples I gave in the last 15 minutes, because it's often the same thing that we need to consider, but seen from a different lens. So the first one, if you're a trainer or a teacher, you need to build vocabulary into your lesson. You need to build vocabulary into your training. Too often, you get into a training and then you present acronyms like several letters meaning the lingos of the work. You also have vocabulary if it's in computer science. If you're in the trades, as an electrician, plumber, in marketing, in sales. There are all kind of vocabulary that are specific to your field, and therefore training. In training and in teaching, you do need to make sure that you build vocabulary, because otherwise the person listening to you will just hear words and sounds but won't have the meaning of what you want to say. That's quite important. The next one is to do hands-on activities. So often I've done a few trainings where for the hands-on activities is to use a mouse and to click that you've seen the slide. That is a way to be hands-on. The other one would be if you have a workbook, for example, you have a word search, or you have a workbook and you have different words and you need to put them in the correct table. You can even cut the little words and people have to glue them. That's also possible. If you have a screen and you have to get people to click words or expression and dragging on the screen is a way for people to actually be moving and being hands-on. For example, if you listen to Tony Robbins, when Tony Robbins does his events, for example, Passion Within, that's the last one that I attended. When you do the activities, he's going to talk for a little bit, then he gets everybody up, gets everybody jumping, gets people to turn around and talk to other people. The idea here is there's movement in what we're doing. Movement is very, very important in doing that. So doing trainings for 8 hours where people are sitting, at some point they just zone out and they won't be there. So that's something to keep in mind. Here I mentioned, so the third one is about using play. So using formative aspects and different ways for people to learn. So you can do videos, you can do charts, there's reading, moving things around, doing hands-on. So when I do safety for science, we're actually going to do labs in a shop. We are touching what's happening so that we can have a feel for the training. If you don't have a feel for the training, if you don't plan for people to feel what they have to do, it's much harder for them to learn. The next one is modeling. As a teacher and as a trainer, you need to be able to model what you mean. So that means that you want to use the proper vocabulary. If you are teaching some skills, you want to be able to use that skills. So when students are looking at you, they're not just seeing what you're teaching them, but they're seeing you using what they're learning. And that's quite amazing. And that's why some people, they will, after high school, they're going to go into the trades. They just say, okay, show me what I need to do, and I'm going to do what I need to do. And that's how I learn. Very important. Other people, they just want to go and sit and listen and absorb what it is. That's quite an interesting way of looking at it. And indeed, when you are doing training or as a teacher, you need to use all the ways of communication. That means that you need to allow students and adults to read so they can get information. You want them to be able to write so that they can get their thoughts out, their opinion. And that's a great way for them to organize their ideas so that they can talk about their training. They can talk about what they are learning. So that's important as adults, because if you're part of a team, if you don't know how to communicate, then it's much harder for the team to work together. For students in the school, same thing. If they don't know how to talk about the topics, then it just becomes just ideas, nothing more than ideas. And what you do with ideas, you can collect them. But if you don't use them, you tend to forget. So that's something to keep in mind. The other one is to use pictures. Think about 2023, what we have. People love social media with pictures and little videos. Videos is very important for people to learn, because many people are very visual, but other people are very auditory. So that means that they need to hear how things are. So that's something to keep in mind. I was giving an example to my students. In French, if you, for example, you watch TV, often we just say we watch TV. But in French, we can do it in two different ways. The expression is either to watch TV or to listen to TV. And it's interesting because someone who is very visual will say regarder la télé or watching TV. It's so quite amazing. And there are others where Watching is not as important as listening. And therefore, they're going to say, j'écoute la télé. And that it is just their perspective on how things go. For the same reason, there's some people in classes or in a training group where they're going to watch a video or they're going to do doodling, but they will be able to listen at the same time. And they will remember everything they hear, even though they are doing something on the side that uses their eyes. There are other people they need to see. They need to see, and hearing it is not enough. They need to be able with their eyes to see. So that's important to be mindful of that for your students, for your adult trainees in the group. And the last one is knowing that it takes time. When you're learning in school, it takes time. So, for example, we have a grade 1 to grade 12. It takes 12 years before you could say, okay, let's see if we can go to the workplace. Some people don't even finish grade 12 and they go right to the workplace. People go to college, go to universities, and it takes time. And when you graduate, it's just a piece of paper. You have to go in the real world, and then you need to apply what you've learned, and then learning continues. And all of that takes time. To become a veteran teacher, or a senior analyst, a senior salesperson, a master plumber, master electrician, a master tech, a welder. Many people, in order to be very good, they need time. They need years, sometimes they need decades where they feel very comfortable with their trades. And I think that's quite important as a trainer. And I'm going to approach the third part of this podcast, which is about leadership. The reason why I always include the leadership part is that when you are a leader, you are looking at people with you and around you, people that you are helping, your people you are guiding. So as a teacher or trainer, you are what's the word? I just forgot. You are a leader. There you go. If you are in a company, you could be a project manager. You are the leader of your group. In a school, it could be a principal. In a university, it could be a dean. In a company, it would be the CEO. And when you think of leaders, leaders are very important so that people know what to expect. And as a leader, what do you need to do to succeed? Guess what? Similar ideas I've been saying so far will apply. So let's see. So as a leader, you need to be able to build the vocabulary needed so that you can communicate as a leader to your group, to your crowd. What's the vision? What's the purpose of what they're doing? And it's important because if you don't have the proper vocabulary, or if you don't communicate it so that people understand your vision, then you may not get what you are hoping for. So building vocabulary for yourself as a learner allows you to be a much better leader. The other one is to do hands-on. The reason why I say here to hands-on, a leader that just stays at his or her desk and do not go and do the groundwork to understand what's happening will never be as good as a leader than someone who go to the classes, either as like a principal going to classes, deans going to different departments, your project manager going to see individual team members to see how things are going, to be able to help them if needed. If you're the CEO of a company, finding a way to be able to see all the parts of your organization so that you know what you're asking others to do as a leader is quite important. And indeed, you need to be able to give a chance for people to learn in many different ways. So that means that you want to be present for your team, for your class. So that means that you need to use videos, for example. You need to use plans, checklists, so that people know, okay, there are procedures. When there are procedures with what you want to do, it's easy to replicate. It's easy to train new people. So here, it's very important to do that. The other one is modeling. So for example, if you are, okay, so people are talking about the automakers right now and the unions. Interestingly enough, if you are to work in a company that you're building cars, it could be, I'm not saying that you have to, but it could be a good idea to promote the company you're working for. So you're modeling what you want to do. Other ways of modeling, if you have a company and there's a vision or there's something you want to achieve, modeling what you want from your worker, from your teams, from your student, modeling what you want is a great way for everybody to be at the same page. Quite important. And the next thing, then again, you need to be able to you need to be able to speak, you need to be able to write, and you need to be able to read so that you can get all the information and you can communicate all the information needed for everybody involved to know what's going on. So as a principal, you need to know and speak and write and read so that your team knows what they want at school. For dean of a university or college, if you're a CEO, you need to be able to speak what you need, what you want. You need to be able to write so that people know what is expected from you. And you need to read, because the more you read, the better you get. So let's see if I don't have a book right. So I'm going to show you, I'm going to get a book in a moment. It will be fair. So for example, here I've read the book Built to Serve from Evan Carmichael many times. I write notes all the time. And the reason why I read that book is that book is a summary of the knowledge of Evan Carmichael, something he's learned over maybe a decade. So reading a book from a leader allows me in a few hours to be able to have all the knowledge that person has learned in a concentrated way. And guess what? It saves you time. Imagine that if you have a goal and you say, okay, to achieve that goal, I need 10 years. Okay, let's say you want to graduate, for example. Okay, you want 10 years. The issue though is that if you can find somebody that has been able to do what you want to do, but instead of using 10 years, they can show you a way to do it in 5. That's exciting, because if you can do in 5 your 10-year goal, that means that in 5 years you will have achieved and you'll be at a point where you can create another 10-year goal that you can bring in a shorter time lap because of learning from others. And it's amazing, because then you can do twice as much and achieve twice as much you'd like. I'm not saying to overwork yourself. Reading from someone who's done it before allows you to do what you need to do in a smarter way. That, I think, is priceless. The other one is to use pictures. So as leaders, often what we use are, they are called, they're board. I forget the word. Fun. It's a board where you put images. I want to say goal boards, but it's a board where you put pictures of your goals. I don't remember the expression. If it happens that you know the expression, you can put it in the comments below so I can remember. I did one in January. So I don't remember. It happens. So I'm sure you understand what it is. Sometimes you say in January or during the year, you put a board and you use graphs, pictures of your goals for the next few months or the next year. So that's what I mean for that one. And the next one, as a leader, I want you to remember that it takes time to be a great leader. As a leader, you cannot do everything perfectly well. You are trying, and then sometimes it works amazingly well. Sometimes it doesn't work, and you have to learn from, you need to realize that growth happens from learning. It's important because people around you will realize that if you take action and it works well, people will follow you because you are leading the way. As a leader, if you make decision and it's not quite working the way you wanted, but you're learning from it, making a new plan, and then getting up again and moving forward, then people with you will realize, first of all, of your vulnerability. And second, they will see how much you care for what you do, and they will follow you as well, and if not more, because they can see that you're learning from your mistake the same way that everybody in society, regardless if you're a leader, regardless if you're a trainer or a teacher, or regardless if you are a learner. Learning is a journey, and successes are part of that journey. But when failures happen or some little things happens, keep in mind that we can always, and one of my favorite expression is we fail forward. So that means something happens, you might go down and say, okay, what did I learn? You get up, and then you continue moving forward. That means that you have failed, but still decided that it was a learning opportunity and moving forward. Hence, failing forward. So on this, that is my episode for today. We talked about the idea that we are learners, and when you are a learner and the language you are using is not quite your first language, what are the tips to do so? As teachers and trainers, I explain how if language can be an issue for some, different ways of teaching and training, and as leaders, it's the same thing, same process, same ideas, same ways of doing what we need to do so that we can learn to teach, and therefore teach so that we can succeed as a leader, as a teenager, as a kid, as a trainer, as an adult, as amazing humans. On this, very happy that you were part of this episode. I'll be here on next Wednesday. I have my podcasts live at 7:30 at this in evenings at the time of Toronto time. And if you have any questions or clarification questions, don't hesitate to put them in the comment section. I'm here for you, and I'm very happy for this episode today. On this, have an amazing day. Take care. Bye bye.